Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Stephen Poloz, author, economist, and former governor of the Bank of Canada, joins me on this very special episode for an exclusive interview to discuss the launch of his new book, The Next Age of Uncertainty, How the World Can Adapt to a Riskier Future. Together, Stephen and I talk about the major tectonic forces that are shaping a chaotic world. Among these forces are an aging workforce, mounting debt, and rising income inequality. Technological advances are quickening the pace of change, but Poloz argues the core fundamentals have always been there. Stay tuned for the former governor's perspective on the economic prospects for retailers in 2022, and find out why Captain Jean Luc Pickard makes a cameo appearance in the book.
The past 50 years will turn out to be the abnormal years. So this is a return to a more long-term normal. So that's an important insight.
Yeah.
The thing, other of these things, technology, they're always there. Mm-hmm. But they go in big waves. So we had the first industrial revolution in the 1800s. The second one was in the early 1900s. The third one was more, the computer chips.
Stephen, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this morning?
Oh, thanks. It's good to be here. It's nice to be in Toronto, and I'm doing fine. Thank you.
Fantastic. I was going to ask where I'm finding you today, but today we're recording this on Tuesday. I think today's the launch of your book, right? Today is the day, right?
Yes, it is. Today's the day. So a number of events today, and I'm doing it from Toronto instead of from my home office in Ottawa.
Oh, well, very good. Well, I'm an Ottawa native, so say hi to Ottawa for me. It's been a bit of an interesting time, to say the least, in our hometown. So,
sure has.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in the worlds of uncertainty and turmoil later. And look, I'm really interested, really keen to get into the book, The Next Age of Uncertainty, just out this week. But let's start at the beginning. You're certainly a familiar name to most, if not all, Canadians, and certainly my listeners. But for the sake of those who may not know you enough or not know you at all, my international listeners, tell us about yourself and your personal and professional journey.
Yeah, well, in brief anyway, I mean, I grew up in Oshawa, close to Toronto, of course, and when I became of age, I went to Queen's University, and from there to Western to do my graduate work. I discovered economics when I was at Queen's and fell in love with it, and much to the chagrin of my parents, who wanted me to become a doctor. And so became an economist. It was in 1974, that's a long time ago, when I decided the Bank of Canada is where I wanted to work and do monetary policy. So I was lucky to land a job there. I worked there for 15 years in the 80s and early 90s. And I left to do a few other things, including working at Export Development Canada, which was very exciting. And then in 2013, they talked me into becoming governor of the Bank of Canada, which, of course, was my dream job from 40 years previous. So that's my the short trip for me. It's been a great ride, I can tell you that.
And today I was reading I think you're an advisor with Osler, and of course you're now an author. Is that catch us up to date with what you're doing these days?
Yeah, so I retired as governor in June of 2020, and since then I've been writing a book, which, as you say, has just been published this week, and also joined Osler Hoskin Harcourt as a special advisor, which is really interesting, visiting clients and talking to them about their big strategic issues. And I'm also a corporate director for a couple of boards and doing some things at Western, my alma mater, for the Lawrence National Center. So a full plate, but supposedly only half my time. But I can tell you that when you write a book, more than half your time gets filled up with just that. And so I'm looking forward to, as the COVID situation eases back, that we'll get a chance to actually do some traveling, which we haven't done since I retired. Yeah.
Now, reading through background pundits of what they had to say with your tenure as governor, the common sentiment seemed to be decisiveness. Would you be happy with that short version assessment?
Well, there's lots of words I could pick, but that's a pretty good one, I'd say, decisiveness. And certainly I would say the situations that we found ourselves in were ones where indecisiveness would not have been good.
Now, your master's and PhD are from Western. I am a Rotman MBA grad. Did you wince a little bit when it was announced a Rotman Business School dean was taking over from as governor?
Well, no, actually, because Governor Macklem was a longtime colleague of mine.
Yeah.
In fact, I hired him to his first job at the Bank of Canada. So we worked together for many years, and he's a graduate of Western, just as I am. So where he happened to be working in the last few years is not. That's a nice place anyway. So I don't wince.
Well, I just thought I'd have some fun with that. All right. Well, I can't have you on the mic without having you spend a bit of time for the listeners to understand the role of the Bank of Canada. They'd be familiar with it, certainly at a high level, setting of interest rates. That's what the organization would be best known. But what else should we know? What else should we know fundamentally about the Bank of Canada to understand its role in the economy and policy and even in the political process that governs our economy?
Well, sure, you're right. The centerpiece is setting interest rates, and not just setting them, but doing that in a way that we hope smooths out fluctuations in the economy. If unemployment is rising, well, interest rates will fall, and therefore the unemployment rate won't rise as much, and it'll return back to what it was. So that protects people. So that's the power of monetary policy, and it's what got me interested in it way back in 1974. Mm-hmm. So all that by these days it's around controlling inflation as the sort of the lighthouse or the beacon of what you do, but smoothing out fluctuations in the economy is really what is going on. But we also make sure that you have a fresh supply of safe banknotes in your pocket. Dollar bills, by the way, some of them have my signature on them, which is really neat. The Bank of Canada is also the banker for the government. So all the government's transactions flow through that, including its debt program. So that is also managed by the Bank of Canada. And overall, the bank also takes a very strong interest, even though it doesn't control the financial system. It studies and is responsible for maintaining a stable financial system, working with other authorities. So that's a multiplicity of roles, but you're right. The main thing that people know about is the interest rates. But of course, everybody's got some money in their pocket. That's an important role.
Well, I love that point because, the currency is becoming a bit of a fungible definition. We have cryptocurrency now, and cryptocurrency is kind of in the spotlight these days with, sometimes it's the currency for crime. Sometimes people are watching it. Sometimes it seems to flow around, what do we call feudal currencies or feudal currencies? I suppose the Bank of Canada must be looking at that very carefully. What does an expanded definition of currency mean in the short and long run? Yeah.
Yes, no question about that. In the Bank of Canada Act, currency is actually given the name banknotes, and so it's even more specific. Mm-hmm. And so this new world that is dawning with various forms of, let's call it electronic money, if you prefer, or anyway, crypto is a very specific class. But that digital money is definitely coming. What form it actually takes is a little unclear. The central banks are all very busy and collaborating in designing what central bank digital currencies might look like, how they would be managed. And the idea is to be completely ready for the day when people really want one. Right now, central banks provide the money, the cash that's in your pocket because people want cash in their pocket. Yeah. Whatever form of money they want, the central bank's job will be to provide it. And I think digital money is going to have its day. It may not be a cryptocurrency. That's a very volatile kind of thing. And I think it depends on what things come onto the market. Those things, of course, will be regulated in one way or another. Yeah. And the central banks then will offer up their versions, just like today. Your banknotes, compete with other things, and you still use banknotes. And so I think in the end, the most reliable form of digital money will come from central banks. And so that'll be the one that kind of is center of things. But there will also be these other payments mechanisms that will be in the marketplace. And I think that innovation is terrific. It's great to see.
Well, it's a nice segue to let's talk about your new book, The Next Age of Uncertainty: How the World Can Adapt to a Riskier future. It's available now, just released, where all books are sold. First of all, and you mentioned it earlier on in the conversation, talk about the tradecraft of writing the book. I talked to a lot of authors who say, they lock themselves in a room, or some authors kind of say, I write the precis first. Some say, I got to hit a word count per day. I mean, writing for you would be kind of a natural state. But talk about the tradecraft of writing the book, and then why you thought there'd be room on the shelf for another book about the state of the future of the economic world.
Tradecraft is an interesting term. I mean, I suppose that's something that writers who are professional writers fall into certain habits. Like I know Bev McLaughlin, for instance, she told me how she wrote her books, and in my case, I just wrote whenever I had time. I had lots of time because I retired in June of 2020, and right in the middle of the worst part of the pandemic, couldn't go anywhere or do anything.
Right.
And so what I found was, especially if I was at the cottage, I could sort of sit down there at around 9 a.m. and with my laptop literally on my lap with the view of the lake. And the next thing I knew, it was dark out. It would be amazing how I could just sort of fall into a zone, and a stream of consciousness would go in, and I'd think to myself, well, I'll clean that all up later.
Right.
And so, a few days later, I go back and read that's 6, 7, 8 hours of output. And I think, yeah, this is all right. I only need to tweak this or move this here and add another idea there. So I think my book is written as a conversation almost. So it I don't know if you found that, but when I find it, to me, it reads as if I'm speaking to you.
Yeah.
And that just means it is a stream of consciousness, really. It's organized, but it is that. In terms of why I thought there was room for it on the shelf, I mean, I began by thinking about observing that companies were highly preoccupied with very short-term things, with short-termism as a thing. And what could I do to add to that kind of conversation and help them think longer term? What things should they be thinking about? When you say to a company, think longer term, well, what are they supposed to consider? And so I began to lay out the broad strokes of what would be the ingredients. And I realized that many of the things that I thought of as an economist as basically constants were not. Things like technology, we know intuitively it's not constant. But I mean, it's slow enough moving. We can think of it as a constant when we're forecasting next year. And same thing with things like aging population, those things. So once I got started, then I realized that the forces that are moving those things around in the economy have been active literally forever. And then you could examine historical episodes to help you get lessons for what the future might bring. And some of these forces are really coming to a head in the next few years. And so then I realized that they could interact and cause extreme uncertainty, because in the past they have. And so that's where I got to. And now I'm hoping that the book, it's written in such a way that it can help people in conversations around the boardroom table, but also around the kitchen table.
Well, you talk about these tectonic interacting forces and talking about taking the fork in the road. It reminded me of that Yogi Berra quote, when you see a fork in the road, take it.
Right.
My perception is, and by the way, that it's a really well-written book. If your objective was to have a conversation with the reader, you nailed that objective. Because it's a great book to read, and it is it's well-structured. Now, getting back to I was going to ask you, that my perception is that you talk about these forces that have been around a long time, but my perception is that the forces move faster, the implications are broader, the pace of change is more relentless, and the forces are more powerful. Is that the case, or is it just, it seems that way because we're awash in platforms, Facebook, Google, and all these platforms that just push, for good or ill, a daily tsunami of information to us? Can you parse out for us, is it truly moving faster than ever before, or is it just seem that way?
Well, the short answer to that question would just be yes, because you've got all the ingredients which I think matter. I do think that some things are moving faster. To illustrate, for example, population aging. Population aging is moving fast right now precisely because it moved fast 50 years ago. So it moved fast, in the aftermath of the Second World War. The workforce started to explode higher, about 15 to 20 years after World War II. And now those same people are rapidly exiting the workforce. So global workforce growth is slowing dramatically. So quite a sudden change. The 50 years that we've lived through, though, the past 50 years, will turn out to be the abnormal years. So this is a return to a more long-term normal. So that's an important insight. Yeah. The thing, other of these things, technology, they're always there, but they go in big waves. So we had the first industrial revolution in the 1800s. The second one was in the early 1900s. The third one was more, was the computer chip. So it was more like around 1980 to 95 up to 2000. The fourth industrial revolution is just getting started. So these big waves have had big impacts on economies, on people. They've caused depressions in the past or all kinds of major outcomes. And so that's to say, you're right that there's a sense in which technology, or let's say, platforms, social media seems to amplify everything now. So everything seems to be faster and bigger. Perhaps because of our awareness. But actually, in fact, these forces are actually getting bigger. And so, and what I've talked about in my book is not just the forces, because some of these are very well understood, at least as a slow-moving thing. But like earthquakes, we all understand, that the tectonic plates in the earth crust, they're moving. We all understand that, but, that doesn't allow you to predict that tomorrow that's when we'll have that big earthquake.
It's really the complex intersection of all these things, which is really what jumps out. Your point that jumps out at me at the book. And I wanted to comment on this: the fourth industrial revolution versus the third. I was reading this great book. I can't remember the author right now. It talked about how electricity, when it was invented, took 50 years to actually become part and actually move forward the economy. Nobody knew how to build a factory with electricity at the end of the last industrial year. I think about that with computers and technology. Is it a fourth industrial revolution, or is it the third, computers that are actually coming online and doing what they long promised, which was productivity? Because for the first 20 years, using a computer, as you would know, was not productive because it was just hard. It was just hard to figure out. They crashed all the time. They were terrible. Yeah. That's not so much the case these days. So, is it a fourth revolution, or is it the blooming of the third? And how do you think about that?
Well, no, I think it is the fourth, and I'll tell you why. So, what you're describing, the steam engine, electrification, computer chip, these are what we call general purpose technologies. So they're not like you invent something and then everybody buys one. What they are technologies that apply to all aspects of the economy. And it takes time for it to spread and for you to realize all those benefits.
Right.
And so that's exactly right. And so electricity was relatively slow. You can watch the progress if you watch Downton Abbey on television, right? You get this sense, they got the ice box, and then we got this electric thing and electric lights and so on, and the debates in the kitchen about whether it's better or not. It's really quite funny. But the computer chip really was a late 70s phenomenon. You're right, in the early 80s, not much happening. And you remember economists during the 80s were looking for the productivity.
Right.
Where is it, Right. And when we found it, it was, if you remember when Greenspan, in the second half of Greenspan's time at the Fed, we had this long period from basically 95 to 2005 when inflation wouldn't go up. Inflation kept going lower. And interest rates stayed low for longer than anybody expected that was possible. And the reason was because that's when the benefits from the computer chip were being realized. And that boosted total income in the United States, for example, by full 10 percentage points over 10 years. That's a lot. That's adding 1 percentage point to growth every single year over that period. And economists didn't predict it. They were looking for it, but of course they wouldn't put a number beside it until it actually happened. And so this was what kind of a mystery at the time. And that's why an industrial revolution, usually how it manifests itself is in lower prices. People getting displaced. Remember, we had jobless recoveries in the 90s and 2000? Well, that was people being displaced. but they were able to get jobs faster than they did in past industrial revolutions because we had a more astute monetary policy. We kept interest rates low longer, and that allowed the economy to grow into that increase in capacity and create all the spin-off jobs. And so that's what would happen in the fourth industrial revolution over the next, I would say, 5 to 10 years. That's my guess of the time frame, a repeat of what we saw during that time. And that includes, the World Economic Forum suggests that around 15% of global workers will be disrupted by the fourth industrial revolution. And so, we talk about the K-shaped economy.
Yep.
Well, those folks end up in the bottom part of the K, and the top part of the K grows fast. And what we want is to help people find their way from the bottom part of the K into the top part of the K,
or at least into the middle, right? I mean, I've read some economists talk about the death of the middle class, which is really troubling to retailers, right? Because very, very rich people don't buy a commensurate amount of jeans. Like they don't buy 1,000 pair of jeans because they're a billionaire. They buy 3. And
That's correct.
Does feel some days like this hollowing, it's a bifurcation, right? You've got very, very, as you said, you particularly accelerated perhaps or highlighted by the COVID era, this K recovery. Is capitalism broken? Can this be recovered? And how do you put that together?
Well, what you put your finger on is, of course, one of the 5 forces, which is rising income and wealth inequality around the world. More than 70% of the global citizens have seen income inequality rise during the last 10 years. The biggest moves have been in places like the United States or the United Kingdom. Canada has actually had a decline in income inequality over the last 5, 6, 7 years because of changes to the tax system. So we're a little bit of a different case. But generally speaking, that's going on. And the question is that you ask, is capitalism broken? Well, no, this has happened before. We've had big cycles in the share of total income going to people as opposed to capitalists throughout history. That's what Piketty's book was about, right? The book Capital. It was about that really long history. And so we are now at a stage where the share of income going to workers is the lowest it's ever been. And so that can lie behind some of the things you're mentioning, like I've been left out or I've been left behind.
Political instability. I mean, people get very, very frustrated by this, right?
Yeah. What matters to people matters to politicians. It becomes political. Yeah. And it actually is producing, I think, a degree of polarization of politics because it's kind of a us and them kind of concept. And then, of course, it only takes an unknown catalyst to really get people worked up about it.
It also takes the what's called the rage algorithm from some of the platforms to accelerate.
Well, that's true. Exactly. Magnified or amplified by these platforms.
All those things.
So is it broken? Well, no. I think it is evolving as it has always evolved in the past. It's evolving now. Capitalism will evolve further. I think that the ESG trend, which I talk about in the book, has this substance behind it, which is that, as we go through the next 10 years, companies are going to find that they're short of workers. Okay, they're going to be disrupting workers with new technology and not able to find the workers that they really want because of the slowdown in the global workforce. So the power in the marketplace is going to shift from the employer to the employee. We may even see a resurgence of unionization in this context.
You see that happening, that shift happening now, right?
Yes.
Because I want to. It's a nice segue into my next question. We've gone through almost 3 years of the COVID era, and I wondered through the lens of your powerful forces, if you can parse for us how you think about accommodations and changes that were made during a very unusual period of time versus, structural changes. So when I think of structural changes, I think of this work from home, work anywhere movement, which feels to me a structural change, like something culturally is really changed in the workforce. Anything else? Like we couldn't have gone through 3 years of this without something changed. How do you think of that?
Well, you've put your finger on the one I think is the most important, which is the work arrangement. And that's what I was alluding to a moment ago, is that the power in that equation between employer and employee, the power is shifting towards the employee because they'll be in short supply. They're going to be have to be adaptable workforce because of all the change that's going on. And I think that companies are going to embrace ESG even more, the S in ESG. Even more, which is to, if they say to their shareholders, I wish I could have maximized my profits this past quarter, but I couldn't find the right people or enough people, so I didn't do a very good job. Well, that's not going to be very satisfactory to your shareholders.
Right.
Shareholders will see that repeated performance like that and will sell that stock. And so a company that does a really good job on retaining the workers, helping workers move from the bottom part of the K to the top part of the K, technologically speaking, and being very conscious of the risks that they face, focused on S, will be the ones that keep the right workers and are able to perform for their shareholders. And that's how there's no inconsistency between, ESG and the maximize of your profits, your financial performance. I think that's where we're going. And one of the things you mentioned is hybrid work. It's right there in front of us today. So some workers would love to work at home all day. Others workers want to work at the office all day. Yeah. And then what does the company want? It depends on the business. And so they might prefer the workers be at the office, but they know, well, it works out for them, so it's more productive because they can juggle their lives better. And so they have to find a new
big cost savings too, right? I mean, I talk to retailers all the time, and I'm struck by the cultural change. Like retailers who would never, business leaders, and this crosses sectors, who would never have hired a senior executive or a senior marketing person or analyst or IT person that wasn't showing up at their doorstep every day. And then second, I think it's starting to dawn on them, if I don't need this much office space, isn't that good? Like, I think that they're receiving huge productivity gains. There's concerns about culture and adhesion to the workplace, but it feels like you've got huge productivity gains that aren't going to be clawed back. Yeah.
Well, that's what I think too. I mean, anytime you take an economic arrangement, which is constrained in some way, and in the old case, let's say by a standard 5-day work week, for example, and you unconstrain it, I think the result is more happiness and higher productivity. But it doesn't apply to every single firm. It depends on the operational demands and so on. Yeah. But technology is making that a blurred thing and making it much more possible. So there's a lot of implications of that one. So for instance, on any given day, perhaps there'll be half or 2/3 the number of people commuting downtown in any given city on a given day. Say it's half for sake of argument. That affects your decisions around infrastructure, roads, bridges, public transit. It affects the housing market. We've already seen that. People are willing to move further away because they only have to commute once in a while, and having more space, of course, and a different lifestyle. What are the consequences for commercial real estate downtown? My expectation is that we'll continue to see growth in demand because of population growth. Canada's got ambitious immigration policy.
Well, and at big cities, I will and always will attract people, right? Exciting big cities will always attract people for different reasons, and they're attracted to the smaller towns like Oshawa or in our parts of the world, Niagara, or wherever you want to live. That affords you all those benefits within a bit of a reach of where you need to be. You end your advice, or you end the book with advice and prescriptions for the future. You find wisdom and leadership lessons in a big, someone I follow extensively, Jean Luc Pickard from Star Trek. Lots of great lessons to be learned from Jean Luc. Discuss that for a second. Why did you're a big Star Trek fan, and what struck you about his that character's leadership style that jumped out at you to put it in the book?
Well, I am a big Star Trek fan since the very beginning, and I bet you can't make that claim. So, I mean, when it first came...
I can actually.
Well, anyway, never mind. But anyway, there, and also President Bartlett from the West Wing. Those are my two favorites. And when I coach my leaders, I suggest they watch the first season of The West Wing, and I suggest that they read the book "Make It So" which is a drawing of Jean Luc Pickard's leadership secrets.
Yeah.
But I think to take them together, really what we're seeing are visible examples of what they call values-based leadership. It's leading with your values. This is what they teach you at Columbia University in their leadership program. And so putting your values out in front of you like they do, it's obvious that their people come first. Those leaders are concerned about their people, and in return, their people will lay down in front of a train for them if that's what they need, And so for me, family first, hard work, humility, and take the high road. I always say take the high road because the view is always better from the high road. If you just lead with some basic principles like that, what you find is the people, they agree with that. And then they know, they can anticipate how as a leader you will react, as you see on Star Trek. I mean, when the Enterprise or a star is about to blow up, and ruin everything.
As it is every second episode.
That's right. There's only about 30 seconds left on the timer. And, Geordi is working away on something. And then the suggestions start flying around from the team. Right.
Yeah.
And Jean-Luc is there calmly watching his team, and he says, that sounds like an idea. Make it so.
Yeah.
And, that's not what every leader does, is it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. You see very different leadership styles.
Yeah.
And I think this more volatile environment that we're heading for will be one where people are going to be uncertain and afraid of that uncertainty. Mm. And the employer is in a position to actually help calm that down and help mitigate some of those risks for them without a great deal of cost, and therefore encourage them to stay with the firm and be productive for a very long time. So I think that's the kind of leadership that fits the kind of world I'm describing in the book.
Last quick question for you. I want to bring you to current events. Speaking with retailers, they look at two things and trying to suss out what's going to happen in 2022. So I'm bringing your lens right back to short term. They look at inflation on the one hand, and on the other hand, they look at a huge stockpile of cash that Canadians have that they might consider dry powder for the economy. And these two things will work together. It's not their grandparents' inflationary environment. That's a different playbook. How do you see it in kind of 30 seconds? Do you see the economy continuing to grow because yes, there's inflation, but there's enough dry powder in the economy to power through it? Would that be your assessment, or am I way off base?
I think you're really close there. For the first on inflation, prices in the economy went down before they went up. They went down in the first 6 to 8 months of the pandemic, and they recovered in the spring of 2021. Okay, which by the way is a year ago. And so that base effect, what economists call the base effect, is going to cause inflation to be a fairer comparison over the next 6 to 8 months. So the big run up was in January to June of last year. So January to June this year, we'll see it level off and probably roll over. And we're going to fix those supply chain issues. There's too much money at stake for that not to be the case. So we'll get that rollover this year. In terms of the money that people have to spend, it's true. People have saved money. Not everybody, of course. Some people barely made it through the pandemic, but others were able to save money. And so that stock of savings is a big question mark for forecasters. What's going to happen with that money? And I think that the next age of uncertainty is a period when people will be a little bit more conservative financially and probably are going to carry a higher level of savings on average and not spend all that money. But I do think they're going to spend some of it because I know people can't wait to get out there. They for sure can't wait to travel. They can't wait to get to come in Toronto and stay in the hotel and eat in restaurants and all those things.
Yeah.
And so this is going to happen. And so that and of course the retail experience is fundamentally altered by this. Yeah. But it's still better in person, isn't it? So I think people are ready to go.
Well, my guest is Stephen Poloz. His book is out today, available at all great bookstores where you buy your books. The Next Age of Uncertainty, How the World Can Adapt to a Riskier Future. Stephen, thanks so much for being my guest. It's a real treat to talk to you. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. It's a great book, and I wish you to live long and prosper. as you continue to educate and ruminate on these things. So thanks again for joining the Voice of Retail podcast.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this special episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and click and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically twice a week. And check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Conversations with Commerce Next podcast, and the Food Professor podcast with Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my all-new YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of M.E. LeBlanc Company and Maven Media. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Have a safe week, everyone.